The invitation wasn't paper. It wasn't an email. It was a feeling, a subtle warmth that bloomed in your pocket, emanating from a sleek black card that simply appeared there. No one knew how. The card itself was featureless, save for a single stylized flame embossed in its center. When you touched it, a voice whispered directly into your mind, a voice smooth as velvet and sharp as glass. It spoke of a game called Heat. It promised a prize beyond comprehension, beyond the wildest dreams of a generation drowning in debt and uncertainty. It promised a lifetime of financial freedom. No more student loans, no more rent, no more scraping by, just pure, unadulterated liberty. The voice was a master of temptation. It knew your fears. It had cataloged your anxieties. It spoke of the system, the one that chews you up and spits you out, the one that promises a future but delivers a cage. Heat was the key to that cage. The rules were vague, the details shrouded in mystery, but the prize was crystal clear. It was a golden ticket, not to a chocolate factory but to life itself, a life without the crushing weight of modern existence. The allure was intoxicating, a potent cocktail of hope and desperation. It targeted the young, the bright, the ambitious, the ones who felt the world's boot on their neck the most acutely. It was a predator, and it knew its prey. For those who answered, the card would grow warmer, a comforting heat that spread through their veins. It was a sign of acceptance, a confirmation that they were chosen. This warmth was the first taste of the game, a seemingly benign promise of the intensity to come. But even then, there was something unsettling about it. It felt too personal, too intimate. The voice knew your name. It knew the balance of your empty bank account. It knew about the eviction notice taped to your door. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a diagnosis. The game didn't just want players. It wanted souls ripe for the harvest. Individuals pushed so far to the edge that they would willingly step into the fire. And so they came. From every corner of the city, drawn by an invisible thread of shared desperation. They were artists, scholars, athletes, dreamers. Each one believed they were special. Each one believed they had what it took to win. They saw the prize and ignored the fine print because there was no fine print to see. There was only the warmth, the voice, and the blinding light of the promised reward. They were about to learn that the game's name, Heat, wasn't just a metaphor. It was a literal warning. The price of freedom was to be paid in sweat, in fear, and ultimately in the scorching of the human spirit. The meeting point was an abandoned warehouse on the industrial outskirts, a place where the city's ambition went to die. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rust and anticipation. 100 young adults stood in silence, their faces illuminated by the harsh glare of overhead floodlights. They were a diverse tapestry of humanity, yet a single thread connected them all, the quiet hum of desperation. There was Maya, a brilliant pre-med student whose scholarships had run dry, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a shattered dream. She clutched the strap of her worn backpack, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed and determined. She wasn't just playing for money, she was playing to reclaim a future that had been stolen from her. Beside her stood Liam, a former college athlete whose career-ending injury left him with nothing but chronic pain and a stack of medical bills. His broad shoulders slumped, the confidence he once wore like a second skin, now replaced by a haunted look. He saw Heat as his one last shot at relevance, a way to prove he was more than just a broken body. He scanned the faces around him, sizing up the competition, his survival instincts already kicking in. He saw weakness in some, arrogance in others. He saw himself reflected in their anxious eyes, and the recognition sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't a team. This was a pool of sharks, and the water was about to be chummed. Then there was Chloe, a cynical art student with a piercing gaze and a tongue to match. She claimed to be there for the experience, for the raw, unfiltered human drama she could channel into her work. But her bravado was a thin veneer over a deep-seated fear of mediocrity. She was terrified of a life spent creating art that no one would ever see, of fading into obscurity like so many artists before her. Heat was her ultimate performance piece, a gamble where the stakes were her very identity. She observed the others with a detached curiosity, as if they were already characters in her tragic masterpiece, unaware of the role she had cast for herself. A disembodied voice, the same one from the card, echoed through the cavernous space, silencing the nervous coughs and shuffling feet. "Welcome, contestants!" It boomed, its tone devoid of warmth now, replaced by a cold, clinical authority. "You are here because you are hungry. You are here because you are willing to do what others are not. You have all felt the heat of desperation. Now, you will feel the heat of the game." The massive steel doors of the warehouse slid shut with a deafening clang, plunging the room into a moment of absolute darkness before the floodlights flickered back on, brighter and hotter than before. The game had officially begun. The voice laid out the foundation of the game with chilling simplicity. The rules are few but absolute, it declared. Rule 1 is the only one you need to remember for now. Don't get cold. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. What did that even mean? Was it a metaphor? The voice offered no further explanation. Instead, a low hum started to fill the warehouse, and the contestants felt the temperature begin to plummet. The warmth from the invitation cards in their pockets faded, replaced by a creeping, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the autumn night outside. It was a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to emanate from the concrete floor itself. Panic began to set in as their breath started to mist in the air. The floodlights, once oppressively hot, now seemed to offer no warmth at all. To survive, you must generate heat, the voice continued. Physical exertion, emotional intensity, fear, anger, passion, these are your fuel. Stagnation is death. Apathy is the enemy. The game measures your thermal and emotional output. If your levels drop below the threshold, you will be eliminated. The word eliminated hung in the air, heavy and menacing. No one dared to ask what it entailed. The dropping temperature was a far more immediate and terrifying concern. People started moving. Some began doing jumping jacks, their movements frantic and clumsy. Others huddled together, trying to share body heat. But the cold was too pervasive, seeming to suck the warmth from their very bones. Liam, the athlete, started running laps around the perimeter of the group, his powerful legs eating up the space, his breath coming in ragged clouds. He understood physical exertion. This was his element. He shouted at others to join him, to keep moving, his voice a drill sergeant's bark cutting through the rising tide of fear. He was generating heat through action, through a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. Maya, however, found a different source of fuel. The injustice of it all, the sheer cruelty of their situation, ignited a spark of rage within her. She focused on her anger at the system, at the faceless puppet masters behind this sick game, at the circumstances that had forced her into this concrete tomb. Her fists clenched, her jaw set. She felt a different kind of warmth spread through her, the hot, searing fire of pure indignation. She wasn't just fighting the cold, she was fighting back with a fury that burned brighter than any physical exercise. The game wanted heat, and she would give it an inferno. After an hour of frantic, chilling survival, the voice announced the first official trial. A section of the warehouse wall slid open, revealing a darkened corridor. The first trial awaits, the voice commanded. Proceed, and remember the rule. One by one, the contestants filed into the narrow hallway, the cold intensifying with every step. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, completely dark except for a single pulsating red light in the center. As the last person entered, the door sealed behind them, and the whispers began. They came from all directions, insidious and personal. The whispers were not random noises. They were tailored to each individual, psychic scalpels designed to probe and exploit their deepest insecurities. For Maya, they were the disappointed voices of her professors, the condescending tone of the loan officer, the sound of her mother weeping over the phone. "You'll never be a doctor," they hissed. "You're a failure. You're letting everyone down." Each word was a tiny shard of ice against her skin, making it harder to hold on to the warmth of her anger. The game wasn't just attacking their bodies with cold. It was attacking their minds, using their own pasts as a weapon against them. Liam heard the roar of the crowd turn to gasps of horror. The sickening crack of his own bone replayed on an endless loop. He heard the doctor's clinical diagnosis, the pity in his teammates' voices, the whispers of has-been and washed up. The phantoms of his past glory and present failure swirled around him, chilling him to the core. His physical strength was useless here. He tried to run, to punch the air, but the voices were inside his head, a relentless assault on his spirit. The cold was no longer just a physical sensation. It was the icy grip of despair, and it was tightening around his heart. Chloe, the artist, was bombarded with the voices of critics, both real and imagined. "Derivative," they sneered, "uninspired, a cheap imitation, you have no real talent." Her cynical armor began to crack. She had built her identity on a foundation of intellectual superiority, but the whispers targeted the very core of that identity, exposing the terrified imposter beneath. She saw images of her art being thrown in the trash, of gallery doors closing in her face. Fear, raw and primal, began to generate its own kind of heat, but it was a frantic, unstable energy. To survive, they had to feed the game their pain. Those who survived the Room of Whispers, their numbers now noticeably thinned, were herded into the next challenge. The voice called it the Mirror Maze of Regret. The chamber was a labyrinth of floor-to-ceiling mirrors. At first, it seemed like a standard funhouse attraction, but as the contestants stepped inside, they realized the reflections were not their own. The mirrors did not show them as they were, but as they might have been. They showed the roads not taken, the choices they now lamented, each reflection a ghost of a different life. The temperature in the maze was even lower, demanding an even greater emotional output to stave off the cold. Maya saw herself in a doctor's white coat, smiling, confident, a stethoscope around her neck. This reflection looked happy, fulfilled, untroubled by debt. It reached out a hand to her, its expression turning to one of pity. "You could have been me," the reflection whispered, its voice her own. "If only you had been stronger, if only you had made a different choice." The vision was a cruel torture, a perfect crystallization of her deepest regret. To fight the cold, she had to confront this specter of her own perceived failure, to find a fire in the ashes of a life she couldn't have. The pain of it was a searing, agonizing heat. Liam was confronted by a reflection of himself on a football field, holding a championship trophy, his knee perfectly healthy. The crowd was roaring his name. The reflection grinned, a cruel, mocking expression. "This was your destiny," it taunted. "You were a king. Now look at you. Broken. Pathetic." Liam wanted to smash the mirror, to shatter the image of the man he could no longer be. He channeled his frustration and rage, the sheer injustice of his fate, into a burning heat. He was forced to feed on his own bitterness, to turn his greatest source of pain into his only means of survival in this twisted gallery of sorrow. Chloe's maze was perhaps the most insidious. She saw reflections of herself as a happy, well-adjusted person. One reflection showed her married with children, living a simple suburban life. Another showed her as a successful graphic designer, financially secure and content. These were the lives she had always scorned, the mediocre existences she had defined herself against. The mirrors showed these versions of her looking peaceful, free from the artistic angst that plagued her. The game was forcing her to question her entire identity, suggesting that the path she had so proudly chosen was the true source of her misery. The resulting confusion and self-doubt created a chaotic, volatile heat within her. The survivors of the maze were fewer still. The game was taking its toll, not just on their numbers, but on their psyches. The initial group of 100 strangers had been whittled down to a haggard few dozen. The shared trauma should have bonded them, but instead, it created suspicion and friction. Alliances were formed and shattered in moments. The constant need to generate heat meant that heightened emotions were the norm. Anger flared at the slightest provocation. Paranoia crept in as players wondered if others were somehow stealing their warmth, or if they posed a threat in a future challenge. Maya, Liam, and Chloe found themselves in a loose, unspoken alliance, drawn together by the fact they had survived this long. But the bond was fragile. Maya's righteous anger was becoming a constant, simmering rage that made others wary. She saw betrayal in every shadow, convinced that the game was trying to turn them against each other. She argued that helping others was a weakness, that sharing warmth would only deplete their own reserves faster. Her focus was on the prize, the future she had to reclaim, and she was slowly realizing she might have to burn bridges and people to get there. Liam, on the other hand, was struggling with a different internal conflict. His instincts as a team captain, a leader, fought against the game's brutal individualism. He found himself instinctively trying to help those who faltered, shouting encouragement, trying to rally them. But each time he did, he felt his own internal temperature drop, a phantom pain flaring in his knee, as if to remind him of his own vulnerability. The game was forcing him to choose between his nature and his survival. To win, he might have to become the kind of selfish person he had always despised. The choice was a constant, draining battle. Chloe watched the dynamics unfold with a chillingly detached perspective. She was a chronicler of the chaos. She saw the desperation in their eyes, the way their morals were eroding under the pressure. She started to see them not as fellow victims, but as subjects. Yet, her detachment was a lie. Late at night, when the cold was at its worst, the fear would creep in. The fear that she was becoming as monstrous as the game itself, that her artistic ambition was just a justification for a profound lack of empathy. The cracks weren't just forming between the players, they were fracturing the very foundations of who they thought they were. The voice announced the third trial. Heat is not just generated, it explained, it can be transferred. In the center of the now frigid chamber stood a series of pedestals, one for every 2 remaining contestants. On each pedestal was a single glowing red button. "You will be paired," the voice declared. "One of you will press the button. When you do, you will receive an intense surge of warmth, enough to carry you comfortably to the final round. Your partner, however, will be instantly eliminated. You have 60 seconds to decide. If neither of you presses the button, you will both be eliminated." Maya was paired with a young man she barely knew, a scrawny kid who was shivering uncontrollably, his face pale with terror. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. For a moment, she saw not a competitor, but just another victim. The game was asking her to commit a direct act of harm, to choose her life over his. Her righteous anger had been directed at the system, at the faceless game masters. Now the choice was real: tangible, and standing right in front of her. The whispers from the first trial returned, telling her this was weakness, that he would press it if she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the button, trembling. Liam was paired with Chloe. They stared at each other, the 60-second countdown echoing in the silent room. Chloe's cynical mask was gone, replaced by a look of stark terror. Liam saw the athlete in the mirror, the one who would sacrifice for the team, and the broken man who needed to win this to have any semblance of a life. Chloe saw the pathetic artist, but also the woman who just wanted to live. "It's a prisoner's dilemma," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They want us to betray each other. It's the ultimate test of selfishness." Liam's jaw was tight, his mind racing. Could he condemn her to save himself? The tension was unbearable. Across the room, screams and flashes of red light indicated that choices were being made. Some slammed the button without hesitation. Others broke down, unable to act. Liam looked at Chloe, and in that moment, he saw not a competitor, but a fellow human being pushed to the brink. He made a decision. It wasn't about winning the game anymore. It was about not losing himself. But before he could act, Chloe lunged forward, her face a mask of desperate resolve, and slammed her hand down on the button. A wave of warmth washed over her, and Liam felt an instant, absolute cold before everything went dark. Perfect. Only 10 contestants remained. Chloe was among them, shaking not from the cold, but from the act she had committed. The warmth that coursed through her felt foul, tainted. The voice congratulated the survivors, its tone dripping with a perverse satisfaction. "You have proven your will to survive. You have demonstrated the necessary heat. Welcome to the final circle." They were led into a smaller circular room. In the center was a single ornate chair, bathed in a warm golden light. Around it, 9 pedestals stood in the freezing darkness. This was the endgame. "The prize is within reach," the voice announced. "But there can be only one winner. The final trial is one of endurance. You will each stand on a pedestal. The cold will increase exponentially. The last one standing wins the game and the freedom you so desperately crave." There were no more tricks, no more moral dilemmas. It was a pure test of will against the encroaching, deadly cold. Chloe stepped onto her pedestal. The memory of Liam's face burned into her mind. The warmth from her sacrifice was already fading, replaced by the gnawing chill of the room, and the even deeper chill of her guilt. The temperature dropped with terrifying speed. The cold was a physical weight, a crushing presence that stole the breath and slowed the mind. Contestants began to fall. One by one, they succumbed, collapsing from their pedestals and disappearing into the darkness below, their elimination marked by a soft thud. Chloe focused on her art. She tried to channel the horror, the guilt, the entire grotesque spectacle into a creative fire. She thought of the masterpiece she could create from this pain, a work that would shake the world. It was a desperate, selfish thought, but it was all she had left. It was her fuel. Hours passed. Only Chloe and one other contestant, a stoic young woman, remained. They were both shivering violently, their bodies coated in a thin layer of frost. They locked eyes across the chamber, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. There was no hatred between them, only a profound, exhausted understanding. Chloe felt her consciousness begin to fade, the cold seeping into the very center of her being. She thought of Liam. She thought of the price she had paid to get here. With one final, agonized surge of will, she held on as the other woman finally, slowly crumpled to the floor. And then, silence. A brilliant, warm light flooded the room. The cold vanished, replaced by a comfortable, soothing temperature. The voice, now warm and congratulatory, spoke directly to Chloe. "Congratulations, winner. You have survived the game. You have proven your worth. The prize is yours." The ornate chair in the center of the room beckoned. Exhausted, emotionally hollowed out, Chloe stumbled from her pedestal and sank into the chair. It was soft, and a gentle warmth radiated from it, a stark contrast to the brutal cold she had endured. A door she hadn't noticed before slid open, revealing a man in an immaculately tailored suit. He smiled, a polished corporate smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Incredible," he said, his voice the same smooth velvet as the one from the game. "Truly an incredible performance. Your emotional output, your capacity for generating heat from trauma and desperation, it was off the charts." He gestured around the room. "Welcome to the real game, Chloe." He explained that the money, the lifetime of freedom, was real. She would never have to worry about rent or bills again. But that wasn't the prize. It was just the salary. The prize was the chair she was sitting in. "This facility, this entire game is a power plant," he explained, his smile widening. "A new form of clean energy. We harness the raw, potent emotional energy of human beings under extreme duress. Fear, anger, guilt, desperation, it's the most powerful fuel source in the universe. We call it heat." He pointed to the pedestal where Liam had stood, then to the others. "The eliminated contestants are not dead. They are our batteries. They are held in a state of perpetual cold, forced to endlessly relive their worst fears and regrets to generate a constant low-level output for us. He then revealed the final horrifying twist. The winner's prize wasn't just to be free, the winner's prize was to become the core. That chair, he said, pointing at Chloe, is the central nexus. Your victory, your intense peak emotional state, the guilt, the horror, the triumph, will serve as the primary catalyst for the entire grid. You are the new heart of the plant. You will sit here forever, feeling the warmth of your victory while endlessly powering our world with the echoes of your pain and the suffering of all the others you beat. The door slid shut. The warmth from the chair intensified, locking her in a comfortable, inescapable prison. She had won heat, and her prize was to burn forever.